And importantly, the British envisaged themselves in 1915, because it's going to take them a while to get this army out to the front, that in 1915 Britain sees itself very much in a secondary subsidiary role. And a number of strategic decision makers, particularly Lord Kitchener, are working from the assumption that the war will be won in 1916. That Britain's military power, if we go back here, this will be in the field in 1916. The French and the Germans will have passed their peak, and Britain will be the decisive force in winning the war in 1916. That's the assumptions that are being made in the early part of 1915. And that's great, except that, yet again, the Germans don't have the script. 1915 goes badly for the Allies. The French conduct a number of offensives on the Western Front, which go nowhere. Essentially, the French strategy is that you attack here and you attack here, and then you can sort of surround these. When you break through, you're going to surround these Germans here. Doesn't happen. Only small gains. The small British force, which is in France at the time, does its own attacks in order to support the general French strategy. But it's the French that are carrying the burden of the war on the Western Front at this point. For the French, this makes sense because this is Paris. Here are the Germans, here is Paris. The equivalent, I mean, the way in which it was portrayed in the British media at the time is, imagine how Britain would react if the Germans were in Canterbury, that close to London. So for the French, they must eject the Germans from France. That is their underlying strategic logic. But Britain doesn't actually make a serious contribution in terms of a large-scale military force until September, because all those troops we talked about, they're not really getting into France until the second half of the year. So it's not going well on the Western Front. It's also not going very well. That great scheme to go and knock the Turks out of the war in Gallipoli, that also goes rather badly. I mean, the whole thing is a farce from the start. I mean, even if you capture the Gallipoli Peninsula, even if you get the Royal Navy parked next to Constantinople, the experience of 1919 and 1920 is what happens is that the Turks head up into the mountains and thumb their noses. It's a strategic dead end. Winston Churchill sees some great campaign here. It's a dead end. Also, so this runs, and I strongly recommend Robin Pryor's book about Gallipoli. It's one of the most balanced and incisive coverage of the campaign. Also, one of the Allied coalition is pretty much knocked out of the war. In the autumn of 1915, the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians and the Bulgarians converge on Serbia, and the Serbian army famously has to march over the mountains in terrible weather, where they arrive on the Adriatic coast. The Allied navies pick them up and take them to Corfu, where they recoup. And eventually in 1918, the Serbs are then fighting their way back into their country. So this is so it's going badly on the Western Front. It's gone badly at Gallipoli. Serbia's been knocked out of the war. Is there any good news? Well, of course there's good news. There's that huge Russian army, that Russian steamroller. The Russians will drive from the east, will capture Berlin, the war is over. Okay, and we can see the sort of the propaganda portrayal of that expectation. But again, the Germans don't have the script. On the 2nd of May 1915, the Germans launch the first in a series of major offensives on the Eastern Front. And in a period of, or over the summer, they push the Russians back hundreds of miles. They completely neutralize the Russians as any threat to Germany. And in the process, the Russian army loses 2 million men killed, wounded, or captured. Yes, that is 2 million. Okay, and keep that figure in mind when we go back to looking at the manpower equations on the Eastern Front. This is the big story of 1915. And because, particularly within British history, we tend to focus, there's the Battle of Mons, and then we press the fast forward button through to the 1st of July 1916, a lot of this gets lost. But this is the big event of 1915. This is the game changer in terms of the strategic situation. Everything goes badly in 1915 for the Allies.